These two drawings were made with the exact same colored pencils, but the paper underneath them completely changed what I could do on each, or at least the techniques that I used. One let me put bright colors right over my darker layers and even blend my colored pencils with water. And there's another difference you can't see in the finished drawings that may be even more important to you if you sell your artwork. How Archival are Pastelmat and sanded papers, really. But first, let's look at what these surfaces actually are. Pastelmat isn't a sanded paper, despite what a lot of people seem to think. Pastelmat has this soft, almost velvety feel. Its surface is made with cellulose particles, so even though it has a lot of tooth, you don't feel like you're drawing on actual sanded paper. It's very, very soft. Sanded papers are different. They have an abrasive grit attached to the surface. You can feel the difference immediately. Pastelmat does grab the pencil, but there's this softness to it. Whereas sanded paper is almost aggressive about it. It loves that pencil pigment. It grabs it and holds on with an obsession like love. Now what about water? Both surfaces can handle wet media. So yes, despite that soft surface, you can use water on Pastelmat, but it doesn't perform quite the same way. With sanded paper, I can blend my colored pencils with water. Can the water blending techniques I did on my recent Lux Archival video work on Pastelmat? For this technique, first you have to add water to the surface. Then you lightly go over that area while it's still wet with colored pencil. This is where the problem with working on Pastelmat hits. The pencil won't really stick over the wet paper. Plus, working that pencil over wet paper can seriously damage the tooth of the paper. With the sanded paper, there is so much tooth and it's just more stiff that the pencil sticks. Plus, being non-absorbent in the case of Lux Archival means that that's not just soaking into the paper. When I go over the area with a damp brush, it blends like watercolor, which doesn't really work on Pastelmat. It sort of blends, not the same. You would be better off just using watercolor for the underpainting on Pastelmat if you wanted to do something similar. And you can use watercolor on the Lux Archival too. You don't have to use this technique to use this paper. Now, before we jump into comparing these in action, we need to talk about Archival. This is where things get a little bit messy. And if this doesn't interest you, you can skip ahead to the actual art project and the difference in these papers otherwise at this point in the video. Now, you will see words like archival, acid-free, and pH neutral thrown around with art supplies all the time. And much like the word organic, it may mean something different to each manufacturer. So let's talk about what each manufacturer says about this. I'm not a paper conservator, so I'm not going to pretend that I can tell you exactly what one of these papers is going to look like 150 years from now. What I can do is look at what the manufacturers actually tell us, and if you're selling your work, this is probably going to matter a bit more to you. Pastelmat is advertised by Clairefontaine as being acid-free and pH neutral. What I haven't been able to find is any extensive published information about things like alkaline reserve, lignin content, or long-term aging tests of the completed surface. Now that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with Pastelmat. It just means I can only evaluate the information that is available to me. But they've never had any weird controversy, so I don't really have a good reason to not believe what they're telling me. And I think that's an important distinction. Then there is UArt, which is one of the bigger sanded paper brands. UArt is also marketed as archival and pH neutral. Now this one, there has been some controversy online because artists, including myself, have tested UArt with pH pens and gotten an acidic result. They were not testing as acid-free. And that may not be that big of a deal. We'll cover that. When I used one of those pens to test the back of UArt, initially, that's the only part that tested as being acidic. The front was showing pH neutral. I personally was concerned that whatever was acidic in the back, because we don't know how acidic it was, whatever was acidic in the back might soak through and affect the front over the years. So I stopped using it, and I've just used Lux Archival for years if I wanted sanded paper, because that's the only one that I knew for certain is pH neutral. We'll cover that in a moment. And at the time, UArt had come out and said, well, it's only the back, it won't affect the front. Fast forward years later, I was doing a demonstration on a live stream, and I tested the back. It tested as being acidic, which we expected. Tested the front with the pen. The front now tested acidic. I don't know if that means it's soaked from the back to the front, or because I stored it how it was sent to me, how they ship it in the packaging. The back of one sheet touches the front of the next. So did that affect the front of the sheet as being acidic, or was it the back? So I don't know. We don't have answers to that. Given a lot of artists experienced what I did, this is how UArt responded. They explained that those testing pens that we had used aren't precise enough to tell you the actual pH, which is true. They only indicate whether something falls on the acidic or alkaline side. UArt said the backing of their paper measures about 6.5 pH. pH neutral is technically 7. So 6.5 is on the slightly acidic side. UArt's position is that this level does not present a longevity problem. They say modern paper in that approximate range is stable and that they stand behind the long-term durability of their product. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that UArt isn't going to last. I don't have evidence to make that claim. I'm also not going to tell you that 6.5 pH literally equals 7. 6.5 is 6.5. It's not 7. That's why it was testing acidic. Slightly acidic or acidic, it was testing acidic. My next concern is they went from claiming it's just acid-free before anyone noticed the pH 10 results online, to then saying that 6.5 is really what theirs is, and that that's really close enough to acid-free not to matter. And again, they're correct. Those pens aren't precise. All we know is that it shows acidic. We can't know if it's testing a 3, a 6, or a 6.5. Which means I just can't verify what acidity that paper really is. We would have to trust UART on this. Now, what I do care about is that the product I'm using is actually pH neutral, not almost pH neutral. So that leaves me not personally feeling all warm and fuzzy and trusting. But that's just my opinion. I'm giving you their published information, and you can decide how important that is for you in your own artwork. For sketching, practice, or working on something you're going to keep for yourself, I personally wouldn't lose sleep over it. But when I'm selling an expensive original that should last for generations, I'm going to be pickier about the materials I choose. But you have to decide for you what you're comfortable with. Why am I even bringing this up since I'm not even using UART in this video? Because every time I mention Lux Archival is the only truly acid-free sanded paper, people ask about UART and always point out, well, the packaging says it's pH neutral, so that's why I'm bringing this up here. Now, this is where Lux Archival gets interesting. Lux Archival is another sanded paper, but this one uses a 100% cotton base. The manufacturer also says it's been tested to remain stable for more than 100 years without yellowing, darkening, or deteriorating. Lux Archival did go through independent specialized lab testing, so we know that they are officially compliant with the ISO 11108 standard. It doesn't mean every other surface is suddenly bad, it just gives me more information about what I'm actually putting underneath an original that I'm selling. So between the Pastelmat and the Lux Archival, which one performs better? Let's see them in action. The first difference that you're going to notice is just in the line drawing. I used a 2H pencil for both of these. With sanded paper, all of your pencil marks are going to be super dark, and when you're working in colored pencil, that can feel scary because on regular paper, we usually keep our pencil marks super light because the translucency of the colored pencils, that graphite line could show through. So when you see that dark outline, even though you're using a really light pencil and a light hand, don't let it worry you. That's just the nature of sanded paper, and when you go over with other color, you're not even going to notice that. And then when we look at the Pastelmat, you can see that it's super light, just like you would typically expect on any paper using a 2H pencil. The next big difference is how I'm applying my base layers. But with the Lux Archival, I'm starting by adding water and then applying my pencil and then going over that with a damp brush to blend out. This technique, as I showed you earlier, does not work on Pastelmat or even a regular like hot press watercolor paper. The Lux Archival is non-absorbent. The water and the pencil sit on top of the paper, so you get that really vibrant look here. So we just need to use a different technique when it comes to the Pastelmat. For the Pastelmat, I'm adding my pencils to the dry paper and then blending out with OMS, and as you can see, it blends beautifully, super rich. I'm going to put a lot of pigment down fast. That's the thing with both of these papers. They take pigment very quick. They both have more tooth than what you would have with a hot press watercolor paper. So they both feel faster to work in how quickly you can lay those base layers down. For the Lux Archival, I'm going to create a whole underpainting using water and then the pencils and then blending over with the damp brush. And I just work each little individual section separately so I don't create a muddy mess. Once I get the underpainting done on the Lux Archival, I switch to using my colored pencils with OMS. And that's how I'll be blending everything from this point on. Now I screwed up here and forgot to hit record. Actually, I think I hit record when it wasn't recording. I got it backwards. The point is I didn't record the background. So in order to show people on the members lesson how I blended that, I just went over it and did the same thing. That's why this piece seemed to jump ahead. It's user error. I'm an idiot. Buttons are hard. But at this point, I'm doing the same thing on both pieces. Layer the pencil down and then blend with OMS. They both blend beautifully with this technique. So why bother blending first with watercolor? Well, you don't have to. You could do the Lux Archival just starting with pencil and blending with OMS. I said watercolor. It wasn't watercolor. Even I think it looks like watercolor. I blended with water, my colored pencils with water. The reason that I like doing that is just to map everything out quickly, get a nice base layer so I'm not fighting the white of the paper anymore on those areas. It just saves a little bit of time, but you can work either way. Both have great color saturation. I just had to layer a bit more colored pencil on the Pastelmat side because I didn't have that underpainting like I did with the Lux Archival. And I want to point out again, I mentioned this earlier, if you want an underpainting like this with the Pastelmat, you could always use watercolor. And you could do that on both of these papers. Now, before we get back to this comparison, if you want to draw these pieces with me in real time, head over to patreon.com/Lachri, where you can follow these lessons or any of my other over 400 long form lessons for just $6 a month. Now back to this comparison. Throughout this, besides initially blending Clean with Water on the Lux Archival, one of the biggest differences between the two papers is that with the Lux Archival, I can put lights over darks and they really show up. Like not just a little show up, they show up. With Pastelmat, it's more like working on regular paper where I need to be a bit more careful about preserving the areas I need to stay light, because once you go dark, it's harder to get the lights back in. In that case, if I have an area I need light and the pencils just aren't showing up well in the Pastelmat, I can take an eraser to that area, lift some of the previous colored pencil layers, and then add light back over it, and then that's going to show up better. Not great for tiny details like dots and tiny lines, but for bigger spots, it's a great option. With the sanded paper, I don't need to worry about it. The lights just show up so well over the darks because the pencils do stick better with that extra tooth. Getting lights light wasn't the only difference. Another big one is that the darks go way darker on the sanded paper. You can really see it in the signature. I used the same exact pencil on both, but on the sanded paper, it is dark. It really shows up. That's just the nature of having more tooth. Now, these are honestly both awesome papers to work on. I love them both. I recommend you try them both. If I had to choose one though, without a doubt, my preference is going to be the Lux Archival. I like to easily be able to go over darks with lights and get that tiny detail and have it show up. That was harder to do, and I had to do it first and preserve it and just plan it out a little bit more on the Pastelmat. Not that it can't be done, I just have to not be lazy, and I like to be lazy, and I can be so lazy with the Lux Archival. Another area you can really see that on are on the details around the feathers, the little frayed edges. So easy to get that to show up and be very, very bold on the Lux Archival, whereas the Pastelmat, I had to work a little harder and it has a softer look. I couldn't get it to stand out as much as I would like. It doesn't mean it's not pretty, it's just different. I will have links to both of these papers in the video description. Just for transparency, I didn't purchase either of these papers on my own. The Lux Archival was sent to me to test by the manufacturer, and the Pastelmat was sent to me years ago to try out by a viewer who wanted me to test it. But I wasn't paid or anything. No one asked me to make this video. No, wait, that's not true. You guys asked me to make this video. And if you are selling your originals, don't just look for the word archival on the package. Look at what the manufacturer actually tells you about what the word means to them and decide what that word means for you. They might not line up. Are you having a hard time finding the motivation to get art done? I have tips for how I trick myself into getting more done in this next video.